Giving the eyebrow to Denise. Is Denise there, or is she?
No, she's, don't you hear the birds chirping in the background? She's at home.
Is that her place?
All right, we're good to go.
All right. And welcome everybody to the Tuesday, May 5th meeting of the Wethersfield Planning and Zoning Commission. Would the clerk help me with the roll call, please?
You got it. Chairman Harley.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Roberts.
Here.
I am here. Members, Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner Oikel, Commissioner Hammer.
Here.
Commissioner Homicki.
Here.
Mr. Deane.
Here.
Commissioner Silver. I don't think so. Commissioner Edwards. Ms. Antoniak. And Commissioner Murphy.
All right. So am I correct in my count? There's 7 of us,
Yes.
and everybody's participating?
Yep.
All right. So, Brian, you want to help me with the first item?
Yep. So with that, item number 3.1, application number 2039-20.
out of order.
Oh,
Doesn't
shoot,
have to
yes.
introduce it? Okay. All right, Rich, take your motion.
Make a motion, we take application 4.1 out of order.
Brian, would you second
All
that?
right.
Brian,
Second.
second that?
Second, yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anyone opposed? So that's 7 yeas, no nays. Brian, would you introduce the second item?
Absolutely. Item 4.1, application 2028-19Z, 24 Maple Street, request extension of time to start construction.
All right, so that is the applicant here is,
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Attorney Peter Alter, representing 24 Maple Street. The Maple Street LLC secured approval to construct a restaurant at the corner of Middletown Avenue and Maple Street at its meeting on January 7th, 2020. Mr. Sulo, the principal, has determined that he will not be able to commence construction during this construction season based on all the delays that he's encountered with the current pandemic situation. So we're asking the commission to extend for 1 year to January 7th, 2022, our opportunity to establish progress on construction of the building in accordance with your regulations. Happy to answer any questions.
are there any questions? Peter, clarify for me, I was a little surprised when I was first reading this. Did we make them, a condition that they would start within a certain time frame?
No, but you have regulations that specify starting of construction and, substantial completion and those kinds of things separate from the statutory provisions. Whether those are legal, I'm not sure, but nevertheless, you have them in the regulations, and the applicant wanted to at least get ahead of that so that there's no confusion as the rest of the year progresses, and they can keep their permits alive until next year or whenever the start time is.
So the normal start time, he could probably wait until next season anyways, right?
I think it's
3 years.
I think it's a 6-month and then a 1 year kind of language. Okay. So they just wanted to get it out of the way. I'll let Peter Alter speak to that. But
There's a 1 year from the date of approval in your regulation. We don't want to have any issues if we start to run up against that time. We thought that it was more prudent to get a year's extension now rather than run close to the deadline. This application was not without controversy, so we'd like to make sure all of the permits are in order, so when Mr. Sulo is ready to get started, he won't have any issues.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other comments, questions?
Just that the application, to my mind, or his request for the extension does seem eminently reasonable. There's also, I think, a regulation in the building code that limits the amount of time that even after a building permit is issued, you have to start construction within a year's term from the time the permit has been issued. So I think his request in view of the totality of the regulatory environment compared with the national crisis that we're in seems eminently reasonable.
With that in mind, would you like to make a motion?
Okay, I guess I can take a crack at it.
Close it first?
Yes, let's close it. I move that application, or that we close the hearing on application 2028.
Is that
Well, actually,
not?
There's no,
Actually, it's not
without
a
a
hearing.
hearing, it's just administrative, so you
Yeah,
can
so-
just, you can go right to the
Oh, that's
motion if you
right.
like, yep,
Sorry about that.
it's okay.
That's no problem. I move that we close item number 2028-19-Z-24 Maple Street, Wethersfield, Connecticut, prior to proceeding to a vote on the issue.
So Tom, all we need is a motion to approve the request under application 2028. Is that what your intentions are?
Okay, I thought, okay, that's right, we don't have to close it. So I'll move that we approve the application to extend on application number 2028-19-Z, relating to 24 Maple Street, Wethersfield, Connecticut, to extend the time to initiate construction from January 7th, 2021 to a new date of January 7th, 2022.
All right, thank you. So
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. And is that, we actually didn't specify the date, but is that date what we're looking for here?
That's the correct date,
In the
Mr.
letter, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that,
So we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Dan did just join us. But I don't think he was here for the thing, so.
Sorry for the delay.
Right, not a problem. But we have seven positives and nobody against it. All right, so have a nice evening, Mr. Alter.
Very much appreciate it. Mr. Kenny, thanks for letting us jump ahead of you for this. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the courtesy of the commission, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Take care. All right, Mr. Allard, would you bring us back to 3.1?
Moving on up to 3.1, public hearing, application 2039-20Z, ARTfx seeking a special permit for master sign plan in accordance to section 63Q at 1160 Silas Deane Highway, the Borden.
So good
Yes,
evening.
this is Lauren Rosen with ARTfx, and I'm representing Marty Kenny with the Borden, Lexington Properties, Innicon. We have plans for a light band and two signs for 1160 Silas Deane. And initially in our meeting a few months back, we had tentatively introduced some letters for 1178 for a fictitious restaurant, or what would represent a potential restaurant we named the Bistro. So we set up a letter style that would be a freestanding letter on an overhang that would be either a halo lit type letter or a letter that silhouetted against wash lighting. So in coming up with a scheme for 1160 for the signage, was kind of a challenge because we have residential above and we have professional below, office space. So my decision in the design was to install a light band that matched the current architecture, the metal fabrication that's been added to the center of the building. And we would fabricate and install what would appear to be two continuous wings of that fabrication. Those wings, which would be made out of aluminum plate, sprayed to match the existing metalwork, would contain LED lighting, and the lighting would wash downward. The letters, which right now you see logo Dolan Dental Group, and on the right any properties with the logo, those would become apparent by virtue of silhouette. So they hang out in front from that band, the light band, and we anticipate that with our lighting there will be a wash which carries down about 2 to 2.5 feet on the background brick, and the lettering that's hanging in front will reverse from white during the day to a dark color at night. Now, two portions of this sign intent is illuminated in a different way, and those are the two logos. So the logos are circular logos that are fabricated again out of aluminum plate. However, in this instance, the logos are fabricated in a method known as stencil cut push through, where the front of the logo will be routed through with the logos of the two businesses, and the letters will be inserted in a white acrylic into those recesses, so that you have a background that's non-illuminated and letters and a circular portion around the perimeter that does light. So it's kind of an accent that's uniform between the two presentations. So with Dolan, this was Dr. Dolan's sign in replacement for the sign that's on the corner that we are removing. And we met with Dr. Dolan and Marty, and everybody seemed pleased with the approach. So that's why we're on the phone tonight.
All right. Thank you. There is a, just for the record, there is a document, there's a memo from Peter dated April 30th where he summarizes the same facts. Basically indicates, you want to take a moment and just kind of go through the second page, 7 signs, 1 monument.
Yep, so we did, it is part of a master sign application. If you recall, the first time around, you granted some exceptions to your regulations under the concept of a master sign plan. So this is an extension of that plan. So it does require the design review advisory committee to review it. They did. They had a couple of questions, I think, more than comments. Let me just turn to that, and maybe Lauren can, just for the record, clarify their questions. So the design review had 3 questions. Will the lighting from the aluminum tube framing just project downward, or will this lighting also light the front face of the aluminum shelf?
No, it just projects downward.
Okay. So one of the conditions of the first approval, which we still have not gotten to, is we have to execute a master sign plan agreement, so that going forward, if the tenants change, that we have an understanding as to how those signs will be addressed in the future. So there was that condition on the first time around, so we should probably apply that again. And then lastly, they were asking what the colors of the sign will be.
So, as I mentioned, the band's going to be sprayed. It's sprayed a metallic silver to match what's there right now. The letters are going to be sprayed an off-white, I would say, maybe 2 values removed from white, which matches the building next door and also the signs that are pre-existing that are part of the master program, which I think if you've been around, you've seen our men putting them up in the last couple of months, most recently today, 1178. In the logos themselves, there's a secondary color, which is kind of a mid-gray, and that matches another metal on the complex, which has been used in kind of this grill work that's on the face of the signs that we've installed. So it's color thematic.
Great, thank you.
One note, when we had discussed the bistro, it was tentative, and we said that we would fully define that lettering based on what we came up with for these offices. So I think this is kind of the final stage of this uniform program, which we could write into the program specifically.
Is there a draft of this agreement at this point? Anything at all yet?
I spoke to Megan Alter today, and she was going to get working on it. She basically, with everything going on, she didn't get to it, so she's going to do that post haste.
And what does the process look like? You need to have that signed and sealed before you give them a building permit to do it?
No, I think we're more concerned about going forward into the future, so that we have this agreement in place, so that if a tenant did change, we have a system in place to deal with that, so that they maintain some consistency. Everything that's being installed now and as part of this application, you guys have looked at in detail. So I'm not so concerned about getting that out of the way now. It's just that after that, we want to make sure there's a record so that we have a plan of attack for future signage.
Yeah, so Marty, in your leases, maybe this could be an exhibit, which I think we talked about before.
Yep.
Rich?
Hello?
You lit up, so I thought you wanted to say something.
No, I guess it was telepathic. I was thinking about saying something, but I guess one question is that the expectation is still that the existing real estate sign is going to come down and be replaced with these.
Well, to be straight up with you, we don't have an agreement with Berkshire Hathaway at this stage to remove those signs, and they've got to agree to do it. So that's something we very much want to have, and you have my word, and I'm willing to put it in a document that if Berkshire, I think they have a couple of years left in their lease, and if they were to leave, we would take those signs down the day they left. But we're working on that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember somebody asking that the last time around, and I just didn't know if anything had changed. And the expectation is that the signs on 1178 are going to be generally similar to what these are?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
the only difference, if I could add, the lighting will be traveling northward rather than south, but we have a controlled beam. So it's a wash light that washes about 24 to 30 inches up, as opposed to, in this case, down.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Peter, Tom?
Yes.
I just had a couple questions, if I could. Wondering if does Berkshire Hathaway have a renewal option that it could exercise? And if they do, how long would that be for? In terms of, I'm just trying to figure how long their sign could end up being up.
I do think they have one 5-year option. My hope is to sort of resolve this and replace the sign. Here's my thoughts. Presently, the box signs that really aren't in keeping with what we're trying to do with that building are on the west elevation and the north elevation facing it to Marshall's. What I'd like to do is remove the sign now on the west elevation and have their signage consistent with Tom Dolan's signage over the dental office. And he could retain the north elevation until the lease is up. But just to be straight up, I don't have a deal with him on this yet.
Well, what seems to be the problem?
What seems to be
What is their objection to taking the
I
sign?
don't think they have an objection. There's not an objection. We just haven't had a chance to. There's a new manager there who replaced the old one, and it's been difficult to catch up with them over the last few months. It's not a problem.
Because I'm just curious, hypothetically, if we said you're great in the front and we imposed the condition that said the side one has to come down, would that, then their choice would be, if they want the front, they can't have the side, but they can't have both. Wouldn't that
Right.
resolve it, basically?
I would think, but it hasn't been resolved yet.
Except that the condition placed on it that could be solvable,
Could be what, Tom?
could be unresolvable by the.
I guess what I'm saying, it seems to me if we impose that condition, both the owner and the tenant are obligated by it if that's a condition of having the front.
I don't
signage.
know, at some point in time, you approved these signs in the first place, so I don't know what the tenant rights are under the lease or anything.
Yeah. And one other question I just had is what we are looking at tonight, consistent with what we approved when we talked to you guys the last time, or are there any deviations from that in terms of, the color?
No, the only thing that was eliminated, there was a sign on the corner for Dolan. Nothing really has been added except for these two signs.
Yeah, Webster Bank had a sign on the corner and that will be taken down. That was sort of a monument sign, which was right near the sidewalk.
So, all right, I guess for the commission, even if we were to say that we understand that tenant's there, they've got a couple of years left on their lease, and that they could possibly renew it, do we need to say anything that says upon the vacation of the premises by the current tenant, and no later than that, the sign has to come down? Because, do we need something? What if the current owner sells the building 6 months from now? Aren't we in a situation where that could end up signed forever for new tenant wouldn't have the ability to require it to come down?
Could we put that in the master sign agreement?
I think I'd rather put a condition on it, and if there's a problem, come back.
Joe, you muted yourself or something? Let me see if I can unmute you.
Hey, Joe, you're on mute. Okay.
Can you hear it?
I'm sorry, in the master sign agreement, wouldn't that take care of it? Because that is really what controls all the signage?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, if you just make sure you're specific about what you want to make sure we get in there, we could probably wrap that into it.
Other questions for the applicant? Rich? I'm sorry, I cut off somebody. Is that Rich?
Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say was I'd rather put it in the master sign agreement than put a condition of the approval that sort of prevents him from being able to put up the better signs. You know, if the tenant holds on for a little bit longer and refuses to take down the existing ones.
I'm okay with that.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just had one more, Tom, if that's okay? Yeah,
Yep.
You said they don't have like an early, lease, they can't get out of their lease any earlier should there be concerns, should the signage be a drop dead thing for them? Like they don't have the ability to exit early?
If they left early, we would take the signs down immediately. We're not in favor of the signs. We're spending a lot of money for Tom's sign so that it's consistent with everything else, so.
Sure. Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, not hearing any additional questions? Is there anybody who'd like to make a motion? This is a public hearing, so we'll be closing the hearing.
Motion to close?
Second?
Lisa, did you?
I second? Or I made a motion?
Okay, thank you.
A second.
I think Ryan got the first and Lisa got the second. All those in favor say aye.
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 And I believe there are 8 of us this time around, all in favor. So somebody like to start with a motion. Joe, you seem to have some opinions on how that might be applied. Maybe you'd like to do that?
Well, I guess I'd move to approve and request that as part of the master signage agreement, there be could we just say there be a recognition that we understand the landlord is working with the real estate tenant, you know, with the goal of removing the sign on the side of the building, and that in any event, you know, that sign shall be removed no later than the time that the current Berkshire Hathaway tenant vacates the space, something like that. Does that work, Rich?
I think that works. I'd second it.
Yeah.
Would you be specific about the name of the tenant, or would you just say any tenant?
I think we're talking about the existing tenant, because we're basically respecting, acknowledging the fact that there's a lease in place and trying to help the landlord get around that. But once that either is agreed to earlier to remove it, or that tenant leaves, just want to make sure that the next tenant can't keep a sign up there, that's all.
Yeah, I have no objection to you referencing Berkshire Hathaway.
Maybe that makes it, that may make it clearer, I guess, for somebody looking at this.
Right.
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah, and I second that. I think this will look nice.
One thing that I could add to this, these signs are modular, so they go up on a track, they come off on a track. There's never a bit of damage to the light bands. They're a constant. So, you know, it's a pretty good system in terms of the look remaining as it is now, hopefully for a long time.
All right, thank you. So, any last comments before we vote on the motion? All right, I'll take them. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there anybody opposed? If not, that's 8-4. All right. Get her done.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Certainly.
We appreciate it. Yep.
Good night.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so back to the agenda. Want to, Ryan, you want to introduce the next thing?
Next, minutes, April 21st, 2020 minutes.
When do we get to topics? We can do it.
You want to skip?
Nope, that's okay. I actually didn't print the minutes or print the agenda, so I'm going back to the
Oh, yeah, just going, right after new business, other business minutes.
minutes. All right. We don't have George.
Yeah, any comments?
Motion to
Yes, I have
approve
a
April 21 minutes.
Well,
Oh, Tom's got a comment.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'd like to correct minutes. Even though I was present at the last meeting, there's a technology glitch that prevented me from registering any comments or votes, objections, whatever. So with respect to all the votes that were taken at the last meeting, I would like to have my participation in that changed from voting for those various motions to abstention.
Okay. Without it open in front of me, would that have changed any? I think we had a full house last time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
I don't see it would change anything. It's just that
Okay.
it's just
I think everything was unanimous.
technically correcting the issue of my participation.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so Julie, you can catch up on that. So Rich made a motion to approve it with that correction. Would I accept that, Rich? Rich? You okay with that correction, right, Rich?
Yes.
You second?
Second?
Thank you, Lisa. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All righty.
Moving on to staff reports. Item 6.1, discussion of low-impact development regulations.
Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I prepared a memorandum dated May 1st of this year, subject matter being low-impact development regulations. The Inland Wetlands and Conservation Commission is going through a process of updating and revising their regulations. They have drafted some language that I've included in the memorandum to incorporate some low-impact development language, so that going forward, after the regulations are put in place, they have a mechanism to have a conversation with applicants about incorporating some of those methods into development projects. This is not a new topic. As you are aware, we have worked with developers and engineers to incorporate those kind of methods into site plans where it's practicable. However, we've been doing that without the benefit of having any regulations in our zoning regulations or wetland regulations. So the Inland Wetlands Commission is taking the initiative. I felt it was time to make sure both commissions are consistent and we have similar language. So I basically wanted to discuss this in advance of preparing a zoning regulation amendment to incorporate some of this language into our zoning regulations, so both commissions are requiring the same level of information or using the same criteria to make those decisions. As you can see from the language, there's a certain degree of flexibility as to when we would apply these kinds of standards. It gives the commission the flexibility to determine if the language that I will quote, I think I said at the very beginning, is they use the terminology to the maximum extent possible. So that, I believe, gives flexibility in how we apply these provisions. The language that is incorporated into the proposed wetland regulations was obtained from DEEP. So it is something that is, I think, being attempted to be applied across the board in communities so that we can potentially be consistent with other communities as well. So I wanted to have a conversation about this particular subject in advance of preparing some final language for you to consider at some point in the next few months.
So Peter, generally speaking, I certainly am in favor of such. I did, you and I were talking about this a little earlier as I was dropping stuff off. I anticipated the word practicable rather than possible.
Rather than possible, yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
Possible is endless.
Yep.
Yeah,
Possible.
possible doesn't take money into account.
Yep.
Exactly.
No.
Yep. Okay.
I think that's sort of my thought as well. Although where I've heard this used, I've seen the term feasible utilized instead of practicable. So I would.
It's easier to say.
Yeah, fewer syllables,
It's a lot easier for me to say that.
which is ironic.
Yeah, I guess if this is coming from deep and it's in order to implement MS4 and things like that, I think we should just be consistent with what their guidance is as far as, what words we use, because unfortunately the words may sound better, but they often have significantly different meanings as far as what the threshold of obligation on the part of a developer is. That said, I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
We could
in concert with those remarks, that was really my question: is whether or not you're exactly duplicating what Deep has indicated, or is there an opportunity to modify or evaluate that particular terminology?
I think it's worth having a further conversation with Deep as to what the intent and what the optional language might imply. When in speaking with the town engineer, he intended this language to provide flexibility. So getting some feedback from DEP with that intent in mind is the question we would probably pose to them so that we're not forcing a square peg into a round hole if the intent is to allow us to apply it based on the individual site conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, my gut reaction is, though, there does need to be consistency between language that we use and the language that Deep uses.
Yes.
That's paramount.
Yep.
Yeah, since wetlands is essentially acting as the agent of the state, and the regulations among towns is pretty uniform, I think, we don't want to create conflicting standards.
Okay, I can certainly do that, and then after that, I'll prepare some final language and get this scheduled at some point down the road here.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Next item. Floor is still yours.
So you probably have been following the governor's efforts to reopen the economy. There have been some executive orders over the last week or so that I think we need to begin to become prepared for. One of them dealt specifically with, I think, a May 20th date for restaurants to be allowed to be open to a certain extent with specific reference to outdoor dining provisions. This seems to be kind of a moving target, and every day brings various levels to the conversation. But we have, after the hit the news, I was contacted by 3 different restaurants on Friday, and another one today, looking for some direction as to how they might take advantage of that. I've been telling people without changes either to the regulations or some policy or some executive orders that a special permit is required for those restaurants that don't presently have outdoor dining. So I did get one application today in order to start going down through that process, but I did indicate to them that I would be having this conversation with the commission to get some further direction. Probably Rich and Joe potentially could also weigh in, because I know the Connecticut Bar Association is trying to put together some guidelines for communities and to work with the state to maybe further refine how they want to do this. There are other issues here. You know, there's the health code. There's also liquor control provisions that are in place. So there's a whole bunch of moving targets. But I wanted to have an initial conversation with you guys tonight to get a sense of your thoughts on this. I don't expect any decisions tonight, but at least I wanted to start the conversation. There's also a parallel effort where towns are being encouraged to form long-term recovery committees to work with businesses to, for a bunch of different things related to, recovery after the pandemic. So that's kind of a parallel effort that might dovetail into this conversation as well. So I simply wanted to start that conversation with you guys, get some thoughts, maybe have some of you guys who are more involved in this weigh in on the side, and see if we can get just a general sense tonight, as to what anyone's thoughts are on this. So at the earliest, the application that was received today couldn't be heard until the first meeting in June. If I just want to give you some of the scenarios and the timelines. If we were to change the regulations to something different than what they are today, unless the governor waived some of the statutory timeframes, we would have to wait basically 35 plus days in order to have a hearing, because we have to send it up to CROG. Going through the normal channels, that would be the earliest that the first application could be heard under today's regulations. And then if you were to change the regulations and temporarily take them off the books, it would still be at least, probably 6 weeks before we would have our hearing on those changes to the regulations.
So Peter, obviously I know a little bit more about it because I saw the emails going back and forth between you and Rich, and I assume your point, Joe probably knows it a lot too. But for everybody else, they may not know the basic parameters, right? There's the governor may come out with some executive order. There's towns have land use requirements in place. Maybe you could just take a moment for, I'm guessing some on the panel are not versed with what are the options that you are kind of inferring.
So as I said, the first option is keeping the status quo. Folks would apply for a special permit to have outdoor dining for their restaurant. There's a separate issue with liquor, depending on what kind of liquor permits they have, but that's kind of the same timeline. So as I said earlier, we did get one application today that will, in order to go through that special permit process with that particular applicant, the earliest would be, I think it's the June 2nd meeting. So that is kind of in a holding mode for that. Without any executive orders or without any changes to the status quo, that's kind of scenario number one.
And given that this is just first of potentially many that would have to go through this process that could take 6 weeks, a month at an absolute minimum, more likely 6 at best case scenario, right?
The best case scenario is 3 weeks. If they hit the deadlines and everything. This one just missed the deadline. We put the legal ad out today. He brought it in after we filed the legal ad, so he could have potentially squeezed in at the next meeting if we expedited things to the maximum extent possible. So there is a 3-week scenario rather than the 6-week, but it just depends on when the application gets filed and when the deadline, kicks in.
And we may all want to see each and every one of these, because there could be a rash of them. And you pointed out, it's restaurants today, but that doesn't mean it's not a clothing store tomorrow.
Correct. So, depending upon...
That's one path. That's
Yes,
one path.
Yes. So, and then there's the other path where there is a conversation going on at the state level. There are organizations that are trying to assist with that guidance. The governor could come out with an executive order that basically waives zoning provisions to a complete extent and allows, if a community wants, for their staff to handle it. I suppose that's a scenario. There's other scenarios where they waive the requirement and deadlines to file it with the Capital Region Council of Governments, which is the normal process of 35 days in advance of a change to the regulations. I don't imagine, it's hard to say what the governor executive order is going to say, if in fact he does that. So there's all sorts of speculation. There's all sorts of advice as to how to help fast track things so these restaurants can have outdoor seating. But I think, I would obviously, we have had problems with some outside restaurants in terms of neighborhood impacts. I would think you would want to maintain some level of at least review of it rather than simply give it to staff and let staff, determine that without having some sort of public process. But once again, that's potentially at some point your call to make.
And that would happen by this other path, which is change the regulations. Right?
Correct.
So if we ask you to change the regulations to make it easier, you would have to draft some language, which would be kind of, you're gonna build and craft that while you watch what the governor's doing, while you watch what other communities are doing, and you're gonna try and potentially craft some language that says, we'll do some new expedited process, maybe temporary, maybe permanent, what's people's comfort level, but, on that same, if this gentleman put in an application just now and it's 4 weeks from now, if we ask Peter to hurry up and draft something within the next week or so, he could still be on that same agenda a month from now with a proposed piece of regulation that would potentially, if people agree with it, make it easier for them. Maybe give it to staff, maybe not have a public comment. I don't think that's great either, but giving it to staff is effectively doing the same thing, right? That's this path that we could create here in Wethersfield to expedite it if we wanted to take that step. Are there other paths?
I think those are the main paths. I think we're in a little bit better position than some other communities. We can expedite something in 3 weeks, whereas a lot of other communities, you have to have it received at one meeting and then they schedule it down the road. So as I said, the 3-week turnaround, I think, is completely fast-tracked, except for maybe even those communities that don't require a special permit. But even those sometimes, depending on how community schedule, it can take longer than 3 weeks. So I think we're in a good position to expedite it regardless of any changes, assuming they hit the right, deadlines, and they're willing to, work with us very quickly. So.
I guess, but only a guess, that something is going to happen from the state level. We can't depend on it, but I would be very much surprised the way things are going that we're going to hear something very shortly from the governor as to these. And I suppose there's always, we could schedule a special meeting if necessary, depending on what an executive order, so these businesses could get off the ground before Memorial Day weekend.
The other scenario that I heard that I just recalled, and I don't know that our charter allows our mayor to do something like this. I can't remember what community, maybe Rich, you remember, that a mayor of a certain community was going to issue his own executive order, which overrode zoning requirements. I don't think we're in one of those communities that can do that. So I don't think that's a scenario that we can apply. What do you think, Rich?
No, I don't think our charter would allow that.
Right.
You and others who have spoken are correct, that there is active discussion involving the governor's office, economic development, consumer protection, the bar association, the planners, the restaurant association, about trying to put something together in the nature of, an executive order that would provide an expedited process for the review of these kinds of things by, waiving, for example, the regional council of government referral for 35 days. There was some discussion about having basically commissions have the option of turning it over to staff or keeping it for themselves, in terms of approving things as site plans rather than special permits, that kind of thought process, just to basically create some kind of framework within which these can be regulated, rather than have it just be, the complete Wild West, or, the scenario that a lot of people have been talking about, which is, basically closing your eyes to enforcement, which, frankly, I think would lead to the worst possible outcome of all.
And Rich, I think you said something that whatever executive order maybe came down would probably be applied at the community's option rather than being kind of mandated.
Yeah, and I think the thought also was that it would be effective through November 1st, and that if anybody got the permission to have outdoor dining under these executive order conditions, it wouldn't necessarily give them vested rights, so that when the order expired, they could continue to do it. Yeah, there was a conference call this morning. There's a conference call tomorrow. Too many lawyers, it'll never happen. Somebody else has to make the decision.
The other thing to add is you guys did last year approve 2 restaurants, or even earlier this year, 2 restaurants with some outside dining. So those 2 restaurants at least are ahead of the curve, and are both contacted me on Friday to make sure they could still go forward. So we got a couple that at least will be able to get out of the box without going through any additional process.
Good.
Yes, I would just say, frankly, I think it makes it a lot simpler if the governor did do something and then it was just temporary for the summer and fall season, so we don't need to really do anything in terms of changing our procedures, our regs, for example. But bigger picture, I certainly think that if we're in a situation where restaurants either can't have people eat inside, or people maybe don't feel comfortable eating inside even after it's allowed, I'd like to figure out a way to help those businesses be able to move to the outside. But
Joe, you're on.
You're muted.
Joe, you muted yourself. Yep.
Editing yourself.
I see it as a temporary fix for this year, as opposed to wanting to change our regulations forever. And I think somebody else said, I think, we still need to be careful to avoid situations where somebody fills up their 100-person dining room and their 100-person outside. If we can create a 100-person outside because they're not using the inside, or they're only using half the inside, let them expand outside, but still have some protections in place to make sure it's not going to create big issues with neighbors and all that stuff. So I think we have to be careful. And I don't think I'd be a fan of rushing to make a permanent change to our regulations. I hope we could find a way to just deal with this emergency situation and make it workable, but still have some measure of protection, for everybody.
I was thinking about this along the same lines as the temporary moratorium, where there's a date that we can review it again and see what, where this whole situation is at, and potentially reconsider it or extend it further.
I'm sorry, moratorium on letting it happen?
Sort of the reverse of a moratorium, where a moratorium prohibits certain things, is just having a time frame certain where we would, the change would be taken off the books, or it could be extended depending upon what's going on with the pandemic and other related things. So the other thing I was also going to mention is this may also apply to other types of businesses, such as retail, where they're limiting how many people can go inside, but if it was outside on the sidewalk or somewhere else where they could display products. So there's other wrinkles to this that may also apply.
Rich, any sense of how quickly something might happen through the governor at this point?
Based on what I've seen over the last 6 weeks, I wouldn't expect anything to happen in under a week. But I think given the May 20th date, there is sort of a self-imposed urgency to this. So maybe early next week would be my guess.
And Peter, have you been able to learn what any other towns might be doing? I mean, West Hartford, I know, has a ton of outdoor dining. Glastonbury, Newington has some. Are there any things in the works that you're aware of?
Today, the planning listserv was just alight with all sorts of scenarios, from, as Rich indicated, some staff suggesting we just look the other way, which is obviously not kind of where I'm coming from, to other communities already have regulations that only require a site plan, no public hearing. So it's kind of all over the board, and other communities are basically maintaining the same status quo because they want to at least review them on a case-by-case basis, so they're not just letting the Wild West happen in their communities. So I think if we're going to get further guidance from the governor in potentially a week, we might, I got to look at the calendar and the deadline, we might be able to, and if part of that is waiving, some of the notice to CROG, we might be able to have something on the first meeting in June, or the second meeting in June. I would craft something real quick and obviously reach out to some of you guys and get some feedback, but so that we can get something, at least publicly discussed, so that we can debate what way to go.
Yeah, I think one of the earlier executive orders allows you to publish on the website rather than in the papers, so you might be able to save yourself a few days that way too.
Right. So, but yeah, it's a moving target, and it's all over the board at this point. So, I think you're right. I think you're right. If the governor issues an order, it will help. It'll help everybody.
Is there anybody on the commission that thinks that giving the reins to Peter as a mechanism to expedite reviews is the right answer? Joe, you mute
I
yourself.
would tend to think that in terms of drafting something for the commission to approve, it's certainly within Peter's domain, and he has his fingers on the keyboard to be able to handle that sort of thing. My concern in hearing all this is that so far the focus is on procedure and procedural requirements, and being able to overcome difficulties that current procedures might impose upon a business that wants to have some kind of relief relative to current land use provision, regulatory requirements. My concern is a little more than just procedural, though. Whatever we would do, we need to make sure that that any approvals that we might provide for any entity on the land use regulatory side doesn't conflict with or is in concert with appropriate medical and health guidelines. And I would tend to think that with respect, for example, to the application that Peter has received today, that to obtain input and guidance from, say, the health district or, an entity that has knowledge relative to health and safety regulations would be very much appreciated to assist us in imposing any kinds of conditions or whatever on any potential approvals that might be provided. It's just the comment that I have on this whole matter. We need to make sure that we, in opening up things, that we're not going to further aggravate the potential for people being exposed to this virus, which is extremely serious and deadly and apparently very easy to contract and spread. So whatever we do, we must not increase the risk for our population, for our people.
I'm going to read between the lines and say that your response suggests that you would not prefer to hand it over to staff. I don't think Pete wants it to be a staff call either. And if that's the case, right, if we're going to maintain some oversight of it, then we might as well just be waiting for the governor's decree and not have Peter start chasing down some draft language yet that put forward. If nobody wants that anyways, then I guess it's more of a wait and see what comes out of the governor's office. What I'm thinking is the right path. Is that about right?
Well, let's say I'm on my own side. I'm fairly conservative about when it comes to issues of health and safety regulations and breaching those or abrogating them in any way.
So my perspective is just to put it in comparison. So administratively, the building department has 30 days to process any building permit. And if we could expedite somebody to be in front of planning and zoning within that 30 days, it's kind of apples to apples. So if we can get some modifications to some of the public notice stuff, we can get stuff in front of you almost in a 2-week, literally a 2-week turnaround so that you can discuss it. It's publicly discussed. Everybody, we have the opportunity to coordinate with the health department, the building department, the fire marshal, et cetera. We give them an opportunity to weigh in. We get all of that incorporated into the application. I don't think that's an undue burden to impose upon somebody wishing to do something, outside that could have impacts to neighbors and parking and traffic and things like that. So that's kind of my perspective. I'm not real comfortable owning it at the staff level completely. So I think there should be some public component to this conversation. But if we can expedite that literally in a couple of weeks, that would be kind of my preference. So I think I would agree. If we can get some additional guidance from the governor, the state, or whoever it is, and then have a process where we can expedite these things to get them on your agenda as soon as possible, that would be my preference.
Like what Peter says. Yeah. I think to Tom's point, having the local health department have to sign off on any restaurant activity in the first place, as well as, I'm relatively confident that, if the governor's office is going to start doing the reopening for outdoor restaurants, that there are going to be, best practices imposed, on how it's done, either at the state or the local level, just to, not undo the good that the whole purpose of the, social distancing and the self-quarantining and so forth.
I think we really have to wait for the governor's office to come out. I think it would be a good idea for Peter and your staff to start putting some ideas together. So if and when something happens through the governor's office, we're ready to roll.
And
I mean, we should probably know within a week whether it has traction and seems to be heading in a particular direction or not, so.
And we can have it on the next agenda, and if, you know, if time allows, I can make an effort to draft something up so that we can discuss a specific scenario, then we can get ahead of it a little bit.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that my concern was more, you know, it wasn't relative to procedure. It's the substance, and I tend to think that the assertion that the governor, any order or decree on the part of the governor's office is going to incorporate some pretty specific and rigid guidelines will probably cover that. And I don't want to be perceived as being an obstacle to having, being able to have procedures in place to facilitate reopening. So I have no objection as to the procedural aspects of you know, the subject matter.
No, and you raise a good point that, I mean, we don't want to go through this exercise if it's just going to create a petri dish for disease.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts, or is that enough for you? Once, going twice. Okay, you all set, Pete?
All set, I got my guidance, yep.
All right, is there anything left on the agenda?
Nope, you've got, nobody called today for public comment, so we've set up a mechanism in a phone call and an email address, so if people wanted to comment, they could contact us earlier today, and so we do not have anyone who asked for that. As you do have a kind of along the lines of the restaurant, we've got an unusual application scheduled for your next, if you look under pending applications, so we've got a drive-in movie theater proposal for the parking lot at 100 Great Meadow for your next agenda. You may see an article about it in the Hartford Business Journal. They latched onto this, thought it was a writable story, so you may find out more about it that way rather than me getting into the details, but nevertheless, that will be on your next agenda, and we've got one other application that came in, and we were able to add them to the agenda. It's for a home occupation, so you do have two applications in addition to the conversation we'll probably have about outside seating at restaurants.
All right, great.
Aren't all our homes occupied at this point?
Yeah. I think the next agenda just got real long.
That's right, I know, but my business is doing work in my house.
Peter, is it a permanent drive-in? Can I ask?
I think there is a thought that maybe. Initially, I think it was because of what's going on, providing an alternative entertainment. But I think potentially you'll find out. I guess I think it's
more than just
spoilers, huh?
It could be. There's a certain level of investment, that's going into this that might warrant, if it's successful, it may be the kind of thing, if you build it, nobody shows up, but I think he wants to probably entertain that possibility depending upon how, we want to approve it, so. Definitely a novel idea, so.
Intrigued.
Yes.
Intrigued, for sure, yes. Great.
All right.
That's it.
Yep, motion.
All right.
Somebody, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to close the meeting.
Oh, George, you show up just to close the
Oh,
meeting?
yeah, I did.
I'll second George's motion.
George looks very comfortable, whatever he's doing there.
Yeah, nice chair.
Yeah.
Mountain View is gonna be a different location than Harrisburg. But I'm fine.
Dan, it's nice to see you sitting up for a change. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.